The town of Lakesand tucked itself quietly beside Windmere Lake, the kind of place where sun-drenched summer days could hide even the heaviest of memories. On a soft July morning, Rachel Sterling, 34, stood on the porch of her small rented cabin, a lukewarm coffee in her hand, watching her daughter Becca tug at her shoelaces with the intensity of someone preparing for an exam. Becca was 9. She had bright, inquisitive brown eyes and a habit of asking questions that made grown-ups pause before answering. Her ponytail swayed gently in the breeze. Most kids her age flared and forgave in the span of a heartbeat. Becca held things longer, thoughts, feelings, the tilt of a voice, just like her mother. "Can I bring my sketchbook?" she asked, holding the thick pad like treasure. "Only if you promise not to sneak drawings of the principal during lunch again," Rachel said with a small smile, her voice as light as the wind. Becca giggled, hopped on her bike and pedaled off, tossing a wave over her shoulder. She was the one warm light in the quiet, modest life Rachel had built, a life that deliberately steered away from the kind of cold, conditional love she'd grown up with. Rachel taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. Once a promising psychology major, she'd traded graduate dreams for motherhood after an unexpected pregnancy at 25 and a husband who disappeared before Becca turned 1. Now her life fit inside weeknight dinners, multiplication tables, and half-read paperbacks. Her phone rang. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Emma Sterling. She exhaled before answering. "Rachel," her mother said in that same even, frosted-over tone she always used. "You're still letting that child wear that worn-out t-shirt?" Rachel glanced out the window. Becca had vanished beyond the tree line toward school. She picked up her coffee, steadying her hand. "She likes that shirt," Rachel said, slowly. "She says it's lucky." "Lucky?" Emma let out a brittle laugh. "Since when do children tell their parents what counts as luck?" Rachel didn't answer. She'd learned how to weather her mother's disapproval without cracking, though the old memories still pierced her sleep from time to time. There'd been a time, she was 9, same as Becca now, when she'd broken a glass in the kitchen. Emma had said nothing, just quietly opened the fridge, poured cold water over Rachel's mattress, and said, "You'll sleep on that tonight. Maybe it'll help you remember." Julia had stood nearby and nodded like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Now 36, Julia still lived with their mother across town. Unmarried, tidy, working as an insurance accountant. The kind of daughter Emma always said she was proud of. "Anyway," Emma continued, "your sister and I are taking Becca out this weekend. Blue Hollow. That girl needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. Rachel paused. Blue Hollow was the biggest amusement park in the region. Loud, crowded, the kind of place where local news ran PSAs, reminding parents to memorize their kids' emergency contacts. "I'm not sure," she said. "She's never gone anywhere without me." "Exactly the problem," Emma cut in. Her voice had the finality of a slammed door. "You coddle her too much. Let us give her a little reality. Don't overreact, Rachel. You're tired. You need a break." The line went dead before Rachel could protest. She sank into the couch, shoulders heavy. Part of her wanted to yell, to throw her phone against the wall. But another part, smaller, sharper, remembered how it felt to be made to eat cold soup for faking a stomachache. She remembered the look Julia gave her then. Not cruel, just detached, cold enough that Rachel could hear something inside herself begin to splinter. Now, as a mother, she wondered, was she repeating history just by letting her mother decide one more thing? A breeze slipped through the open window, carrying the scent of damp grass and early dew. Rachel whispered to herself that she'd talk to Becca first. Maybe her daughter wouldn't even want to go. Maybe. Evenings in Lakesand were often so quiet, they felt like someone had pressed pause on the world. Street lamps cast soft, broken light onto the sidewalks, like memories too fractured to ever piece back together. Rachel sat in the living room, listening to the wooden clock tick, soft and slow, like the tired breath of time itself. Becca was sprawled out on the rug, coloring. She traced the hem of a cartoon girl's dress with a red pencil. Rachel guessed the girl was probably meant to be her. "Do you want to go to the amusement park with Grandma and Aunt Julia?" Rachel asked, her voice casual, like she was talking about the weather. Becca looked up. "Blue Hollow?" Rachel nodded. Becca thought for a moment, then smiled. "Definitely. There's a roller coaster and a giant spinning wheel. Zoe says there's even a stand with 20 kinds of ice cream." Rachel kept her face steady, but her heart cinched tight. When Rachel was 8, Becca's age, she'd once been left alone at a night market on her birthday. She had dropped a gift her mother had just bought. Emma hadn't said much, just turned away and said, "Walk yourself home. Consider this your first birthday lesson." Rachel had cried the whole way back, her feet stinging in new plastic shoes. Julia, 10 at the time, had walked behind her in silence. She hadn't helped, hadn't comforted, just watched, like she was grading a moral test no one else had signed up for. Rachel took a slow breath, willing the memory back behind the closed door where she tried to keep it. But then she looked at Becca, those bright wide eyes, and thought, if something happened, she wouldn't survive it. And neither would I. "Make sure you stick close to Grandma and Aunt Julia, okay?" she said, trying to keep her tone light. "If you get lost, go straight to someone in uniform. And you remember my phone number, right?" Becca paused her coloring and looked at her mother. "Why are you this worried?" "Because Blue Hollow gets crowded. I just want to make sure you're okay." "I'll be fine." Becca walked over and leaned her head against Rachel's shoulder. "Grandma and Aunt Julia can be kind of strict, but they're family, right?" Rachel didn't answer right away. Family. A word that always tasted of guilt in Rachel's mouth. She remembered being locked outside in the snow once for not scrubbing the dishes well enough. Julia, then 15, had come out quietly, draped a thin towel over Rachel's shoulders, and gone back inside. She hadn't protested, hadn't challenged their mother, just complied like it was all part of a ritual she, too, had learned to carry out. Rachel stroked her daughter's hair. "Family means the people who love and protect you, sweetheart. No matter who they are, if they don't do that, then maybe they're not really family." Becca blinked. "So, you think Grandma and Aunt Julia don't love me?" "No," Rachel said softly. "I just worry they don't understand you." The room fell quiet again. Outside, wind brushed through the pines, making a sound like the night exhaling. Rachel knew she could say no. Knew she should. But she also knew her mother. How she demanded, how she manipulated. If Rachel refused, it would spiral into another war of words she no longer had the strength to fight. And more than anything, Rachel wanted to believe things would be fine, even if her gut already hummed with that tight, high string of dread. That night, after Becca had gone to bed, Rachel stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a cardigan, looking up at a sky strewn with dim stars. If she handed her daughter over to her mother and sister, was she breaking the very promise she had once made in front of a mirror? "My daughter will never grow up with the kind of fear I did." But if she refused, would that make things worse? Would her mother say again, "That's why you've never grown up. You're afraid of your own shadow"? The next morning, Rachel said yes. Becca hugged her tightly before climbing into Emma's car. Rachel smiled and waved. But the smile never reached her eyes. Blue Hollow was bigger than Becca had ever imagined. There were giant street lamps shaped like ice cream cones, mist-blowing dragon statues, and pulsing music spilling out from the massive Ferris wheel that turned endlessly against the pale blue sky. She couldn't remember exactly when she began liking loud places. At school, she often sat near the window just to listen. Cars passing by, kids shouting from the basketball court. Everything sounded alive, like the world was breathing. Becca wore the purple floral dress her mother had picked out the night before. She clutched her grandmother Emma's hand as they passed through the ticket gate, while Aunt Julia adjusted the strap of her purse, as always seeming too busy for the moment she was in. "Can we ride the roller coaster first?" Becca asked, eyes gleaming. Emma frowned. "Lunch first. You shouldn't go on rides with an empty stomach." "But I'm not hungry." "No arguing," Julia said, not looking up from her phone. Becca lowered her head. It wasn't like going out with Mom. Mom would ask, "What do you want to do first?" And then she'd actually listen. Lunch was in a quiet corner of the food court. Becca pointed at the cheese pizza on the menu, but Emma ordered her a salad instead. "This is better for you," she said, placing the plate in front of her. "I don't like greens." Becca mumbled. "That's because your mother spoils you," Emma replied, dipping her fork into the dressing, not even glancing at her. Becca didn't argue. Something caught in her throat, like it had nowhere to go. Julia didn't say anything, but glanced over and gave a silent nod. Becca looked down at her dress, tugged at the hem like it might make her smaller. Later, as they passed the Hall of Mirrors, Julia suddenly turned and said, "Want to play a game, Becca? Hide and seek?" Becca's eyes widened. "Inside the mirror house?" "No, right here." Julia smiled. "You stand here, close your eyes and count to 30. Grandma and I will hide. If you find us, you win." Becca hesitated. "Mom said I shouldn't go anywhere alone." Emma waved a hand. "Your mother always overreacts. You're old enough." Becca looked at them both. They didn't seem like they were joking. There was no soft laughter like Mom's, no warm look, but nothing scary either. Just cold. She closed her eyes. 1, 2, 3. At 30, she opened them. Everyone was a stranger. No grandma, no Aunt Julia, no familiar faces in the crowd. Becca stood still for a few seconds, then began walking, slowly at first, then faster. She passed the cotton candy stand, the roller coaster line, a group of kids laughing too loudly. "Grandma? Aunt Julia?" No one answered. She started to cry. The chatter and laughter around her washed over like waves, drowning out her voice. "Let's play hide and seek?" Was it just a game? Or was this a lesson? Becca stopped beside a stone bench near the koi pond, hugged her backpack to her chest, and let her tears fall, darkening the strap one drop at a time. She didn't know how long to wait, or if she should ask someone for help. Mom had said, if you get lost, find someone in a uniform or with a name tag. But here, everyone seemed in a rush, and everyone felt like a stranger. Then, a voice, low and unhurried, broke through. "Are you lost?" Becca looked up. A man stood nearby. His eyes looked tired, not unkind. He didn't move closer, just stood a few steps away. "What's your name?" he asked. Becca didn't answer right away. She looked at him, then turned back to the path where her grandmother and aunt had disappeared like smoke. "Becca," she whispered. "My name is Becca." Meanwhile, Emma Sterling sat upright at a wooden patio table near the edge of the amusement park, just 5 minutes' walk from the main attractions. A cup of herbal tea sat untouched in front of her. No sugar, no ice. Everything as she preferred, precise, unyielding, without compromise. 30 minutes, she said, glancing at her watch. She'll panic a little. That's when she'll learn something valuable. Julia sipped her black coffee, eyes fixed on her phone. She'll find us, and if not, at least she'll learn to ask for help. Emma nodded, as if they were discussing the weather. Rachel's too soft. She's raising a child who expects to be rescued. No survival instincts. There was no anger in her voice, only a kind of frosted disappointment, the kind that had crystallized into a way of life. To Emma, the world was a brutal place. She'd grown up during war and scarcity, and had come to believe that love didn't protect people. Discipline did. Julia said nothing. Under the shadow of the oversized umbrella, her face wore the familiar quiet that had once been her safest hiding place. She remembered a time, she was 12, Rachel 10, when their mother found out Rachel had hidden a stray kitten in the backyard. Emma hadn't shouted. She had taken Rachel's shoelace, shredded her favorite doll, and said calmly, "When you break trust, everything you love disappears." Julia had stood by the door, silent. She hadn't intervened. hadn't cried. Just remembered feeling relieved that, for once, she wasn't the one being punished. "Are you feeling guilty?" Emma asked now, sensing the silence stretching. "No," Julia replied slowly. "Just thinking if Rachel finds out, she'll lose it." Emma smirked. "She's weak. Always has been. She needs to learn that love isn't coddling. It's guidance. It's correction." "And leaving your granddaughter alone in an amusement park is correction?" Julia asked, a flicker of sarcasm rising for the first time. Emma stirred her tea, unhurried. "She needs to feel fear. A little fear teaches children more than 1,000 words. Rachel won't do it, so I did." More than an hour passed. Julia began checking her phone. No messages, no missed calls, no. "Becca." "Mom," she said, finally looking up. "Should we go back to where we left her? She might—" "10 more minutes," Emma interrupted. "If she doesn't show, we'll start looking." Julia fell quiet again, but her fingers tapped a restless rhythm against her cup. Inside, something prickled. Not quite regret. Not quite fear. Just a familiar unease, like the kind that crept in when she was a child waiting behind a locked door, unsure what the punishment would be, but certain it would be too much. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Julia asked softly. Emma stared into the distance. "If not, then she doesn't deserve to be." Theo Monroe didn't usually walk through the park, but that Sunday the porch light outside his house had flickered, and the only hardware store open was right next to Blue Hollow. He'd planned to head straight home after picking up a few rolls of wire. But as he passed the koi pond, he stopped. A little girl sat hunched on a stone bench, clutching her backpack like a life vest. Purple floral dress, lopsided ponytail, no adults in sight. He hesitated, nearly kept walking, but then the girl's eyes met his. Red, dazed, not exactly afraid. More like waiting for something, or someone. And he recognized that look. It was the same one he'd worn at 11 years old, standing outside a locked door after a long punishment, waiting for it to creak open again. He kept his distance. "Are you lost?" The girl gave a small nod. "My name is Becca. Grandma and Aunt said we were playing hide and seek, but they didn't come back." No panic, no screaming, just the quiet fact of being left behind. Theo glanced around. Adults tugged their kids toward cotton candy stands. No one seemed to notice the child who had been sitting too long alone. "Do you remember your mom's number?" he asked. She shook her head. "My phone's in Grandma's bag." Silence stretched between them. Theo felt the back of his shirt dampen, not from heat, but from the thought that had just landed fully in his mind. If he called the police, it would take time. Maybe the mother was already somewhere in the park, frantic. But if he walked away, who would come next to sit beside this girl? "Would you like to wait in that cafe over there?" he asked, pointing at a small shop near the pond. "They have people who can help, and a phone." Becca looked at the cafe, then back at him. Slowly, she nodded. They walked side by side, 2 steps apart. No one reached for the other's hand. Just 2 people who had once been left behind, looking for somewhere, anywhere, to wait. Chapter 6. 5:30 p.m. Rachel was anxious, though still trying to convince herself otherwise. They're just stuck in traffic, she thought. Maybe the ice cream line's long. Or Becca begged to ride one more time. She'd already set the table. Reheated Becca's favorite pasta. Sliced the leftover apple pie from the night before. It wasn't until the 4th glance at the clock that Rachel realized 2 hours had passed since Becca was supposed to be home. And not a single message, not one missed call. She dialed her mother. No answer. She dialed Julia. Still nothing. The unease spread through her chest slowly. Not like a flood, not like a wave, just a growing weight she couldn't name. Rachel grabbed her keys, got in the car, called again as she drove past the pine-lined edge of town. Silence. On the 6th call, the phone finally rang. "Long," Rachel breathed. Emma's voice came through, calm, almost breezy. So light it made Rachel's back go rigid. "You've called quite a lot. Is something serious happening?" "Where are you?" Rachel tried to keep her voice even. "You were supposed to be home by 3. A pause. Oh, Becca, Emma said, as if recalling a minor item on a grocery list. She got lost. Don't overreact. The world stopped. Lost? Rachel nearly screamed. What are you talking about? Where? How long has she been? We told the food court staff. I'm sure she's just wandering around. Numayan, she needs to learn how to handle things, Rachel. Kids should. Rachel hung up. She didn't wait to hear another word. She slammed the gas pedal. The tires screeched as she turned out of the intersection. Her heart pounded in her chest like a hollow drum. She pictured Becca's face that morning, how her eyes lit up when she waved through the car window. Her laugh, "If there are 20 flavors, I'll pick strawberry." And she had let her go. By the time Rachel reached Blue Hollow, the sky had turned a dull gray. Decorative lights had come on, casting the park in a surreal glow. But Becca wasn't there. Rachel sprinted toward the main plaza, eyes darting wildly. Children, adults, games bathed in fluorescent colors, but not her child. In the food court corner, Emma sat upright, hands folded on her lap. Julia stared at her phone. Rachel ran to them, breath splintering. Where is she? Emma looked up. Lower your voice. You're drawing attention. Where is she? Rachel cried, voice cracking. Julia looked at their mother. We just gave her a bit of independence. Played hide and seek. She didn't come back to the meeting point. Must have gotten turned around. A bit of independence? Rachel's voice broke into a sob. She's 9. She wanted to scream, to slap. But all she did was turn to the nearest security guard. Her voice was hoarse but clear. My daughter is missing. Becca Sterling. Purple floral dress, 9 years old. I need to speak to the police, now. At Maple Bench Cafe, tucked just behind the koi pond near the edge of Blue Hollow, Becca sat by the window, fingers curled tightly around the strap of her backpack. Theo Monroe had ordered 2 items, a cup of herbal tea for himself and a grilled chicken sandwich for the girl. He hadn't asked what she wanted. He just remembered how much he'd hated being asked as a kid, as if the question was a test. Thank you, Becca murmured when he set the food down. He nodded and took the seat across from her, said nothing more. They sat like that, 2 strangers, side by side in the hush of a mid-afternoon lull. Only the soft clink of a spoon against porcelain, muffled conversation from distant tables. What's your name? Becca asked after a few minutes. Theo, he said. And you're Becca. She nodded. I'm 9. I'm 30-something, he replied, smiling faintly, surprised even at the motion on his own face. Becca took a bite of the sandwich, chewing slowly. She looked around the cafe, then said, You don't seem like a bad guy. Theo blinked. Why do you say that? She shrugged. Bad guys don't ask if you want food. And you look sad. He let out a breath that might have been a laugh, soft as air. Sad, huh? Yeah, like my clock at home when the battery runs out. He didn't respond, not because he didn't have an answer, but because of the way she looked at him. Not with fear. Not with suspicion. Just clarity. Back when he worked at the city's infrastructure office, people called him expressionless. He never smiled, never looked angry. No one knew that he'd learned it at 8 years old, when crying meant getting locked in the dark, and laughing too loudly meant being called ungrateful. Becca pushed the plate a little toward him. Want to try some? No thanks, you eat it. She nodded and took another bite. After a while, she asked, Do you think Grandma will come back? Theo froze for a second. He didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to tell her, Of course she will. But another part, the one that remembered the sound of a door never opening, kept him silent. Instead, he said, I think your mom is looking for you. Becca looked down at her hands. Mom's not like Grandma. Mom wouldn't leave me. But if she doesn't know where I am, how will she find me? Theo glanced at his watch. He knew what he should do, but he also knew that right now, the only thing this child needed, more than any rescue, more than a decision, was just a place to sit without feeling like a burden. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting the faint outline of a small backpack and 2 glasses, one still full, the other long gone cold. In that moment, they were no longer a lost child and a loner on the edge of the world. They were just two quiet pieces, fitting into a brief silence in the middle of the world's noise. Inside the Blue Hollow operations office, the security room buzzed with fluorescent lights and the frantic tapping of keyboards. Rachel stood behind Inspector Noah Briggs, who had taken charge of the case just 30 minutes ago. He was tall, with a steady voice and clear eyes, not cold, but focused. The first thing he did was order a full pull of the security footage, from the food court, the side corridors, and the east entrance. Rachel bit her lip. She had stopped crying, but her hand wouldn't leave the photo of Becca on her phone. Purple floral dress, lopsided ponytail, that fearless smile she'd worn at 8, before the world taught her what not to say out loud. When Rachel had once been left alone at a bus station in the middle of winter, she hadn't cried. She was too afraid it would earn her a slap. Too afraid her mother would say, "That's why you'll always be weak." "Stop there," Noah said. On the screen, Maple Bench Cafe, timestamp 5:18 p.m. Becca, alone on a wooden bench near the patio. A man approached, paused a few feet away, said something. The girl looked up and gave a small nod. They walked into the cafe together. No hand-holding, no resistance, no force. "Zoom in," Rachel whispered, her voice dry. The man's face came into focus, a side angle, square jaw, tired eyes. Nothing alarming, but nothing comforting either. "Who is he?" she asked. "Unknown. We're running facial recognition against the public registry," Noah replied, scribbling notes. "But based on his body language, I don't think she felt threatened." "You don't know my daughter." Rachel's breath trembled. Becca wouldn't go with a stranger, unless she already felt abandoned. Noah looked up, met her eyes, and understood. About 30 minutes later, an officer was sent to the cafe. Rachel went with him, her footsteps rapid, heart pounding with every step. The cafe was almost empty. Evening had darkened the sky, and warm yellow light glowed against the windows. A young server spotted them and nodded right away. "The little girl in the purple dress?" she asked. She was with a man who seemed kind of lonely. Rachel nearly collapsed where she stood. "Are they still here?" "They left 10 minutes ago. Sat in the back corner, talked quietly. He just ordered tea and a sandwich for her. Nothing strange, but he paid in cash. Didn't wait for change, left fast." "Which way?" Noah asked. "Back exit. Took a left. There's a narrow alley that leads to one of the outer walking paths." Noah clicked his radio. "Requesting patrol units to scan the eastern trail and perimeter. Subject may be on foot or using a personal vehicle." At that moment, down a quiet road beyond the trees, Theo Monroe pedaled slowly, Becca sitting behind him. She held her backpack tight, eyes half closed from exhaustion. His cabin was just over 2 kilometers from the park, tucked near the edge of the woods. Not a hideout, just a place no one asked about anymore. Just one night, Theo thought. Tomorrow, I'll take her to the police station. After she's had one safe, uninterrupted sleep. Back at the cafe, Rachel sank into a chair. Noah stood beside her for a moment before speaking softly. If he meant to harm her, he wouldn't have taken her somewhere with cameras. But what if he meant to keep her? Rachel asked, her voice tight as a drawn string. Noah didn't answer right away. Then he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll find them. This isn't a kidnapping. This is a girl, waiting for someone to believe she's worth finding." Becca didn't remember when she had fallen asleep. When she opened her eyes, she saw a ceiling of raw wood, yellowed slightly like old paper. The room was small, just a single bed, a low bookshelf, and a square window with dark fabric curtains. No clock, no decorations. The blanket around her was thick wool, a little musty but warm. She sat up, clutching her backpack to her chest. Her small feet touched the cool wooden floor. The door wasn't locked. She stepped into the hallway, moving quietly, as if not to disturb a sleeping thought. The living room was as plain and worn as the bedroom. One wall was lined with city maps, wiring grids, infrastructure sketches. On the desk, a picture frame lay face down, as though someone had once tried to forget something. Theo stood with his back to her, heating water in a dented kettle. He turned when he heard her. "You're up," he said gently. "Not warm, not cold, just steady." Becca didn't move. "This is your house?" "Yeah," he replied, pouring hot water into 2 chipped mugs. "Not much, but it's quiet." She stepped further in, eyes scanning the space. No TV, no toys, no family photos. "You live alone?" she asked. Theo nodded. "I'm used to it." "Did you ever have kids?" He paused. "No." The silence thickened just slightly. Becca hugged her backpack tighter. He placed a mug on the table. "Sit, drink a little ginger tea. It'll warm you up." "Is there medicine in it?" she asked, voice serious. Theo blinked, then gave a small smile, for the first time. Not big, but real. "No, but I get why you'd ask." Becca nodded slightly and sat down. She took the mug, but didn't drink yet. On the shelf behind her were old notebooks, their spines worn down, filled with numbers, technical sketches, pages curling at the edges. Between them, a few hand-drawn diagrams, streetlights, storm drains, piping systems, as if someone had once tried to rebuild a perfect world, to make up for a childhood that wasn't. Among the pages was a folded slip of paper. A single line scribbled in faded ink. "No one needed me to be weak, but no one taught me how to be strong." Becca took a small sip, then asked, "Are you going to take me back?" Theo sat down across from her. His eyes didn't flinch. "I was going to wait until morning. It's late. Taking you now? People might misunderstand." "But my mom will be worried." He nodded. "I know. We'll go first thing. I promise." Becca looked at him for a few more seconds, then set her backpack on the floor. "I can sleep here, but I need paper and crayons." Theo blinked, then stood, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small notepad and a few worn-down colored pencils. "Will this do?" Becca nodded. That night, she sat drawing while Theo read through an old engineering manual. Neither spoke. But in that quiet wooden house between 2 people who had once been left behind, something had begun to take shape. Fragile, but real. Rachel walked briskly through the hallway of the Woodstone police station, her jacket slung over one arm, her phone still lit up with Becca's photo on the lock screen. It was nearly midnight, but she wasn't tired. Her eyes were sharp, needle-pointed, piercing through fear and second-guessing. Detective Noah Briggs was waiting in a small briefing room, a file already open. He looked up when she entered and gave a short nod. "We have his name," he said, turning his laptop around for her to see. On the screen was an old ID photo, blue background, Theo Monroe, 43, civil engineer, single, last known residence number 9, outskirts of Woodstone, near the Eastern Woods. Rachel stared at the photo, the same man from the cafe footage, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was looking at a threat or something else entirely. At that same moment, in a small wooden house near the forest, Theo sat at his desk. Becca was fast asleep, still hugging her drawing pad. Colored pencils had rolled onto the rug. Theo picked up the photo frame he had turned face down earlier. The image was faded. A young boy stood between 2 women, one with curled hair, hand on his shoulder like a statue, the other thinner, smiling but not quite convincingly. Both wore dark sweaters. The boy didn't smile. He stood straight, as if preparing for punishment. Theo couldn't remember exactly how old he was in the photo, 9, 10? But he remembered the old house, cramped, no private rooms, always cold. He remembered that winter morning, being doused with cold water for breaking a glass. Remembered his mother's voice. "That's life, son. The world isn't kind to the weak." Remembered his aunt's smirk as she locked the door. "That's the game, kid. You've got to learn how to endure." He used to think that was normal, that it was how people grew up. Until one day, standing on a bridge construction site, he saw a coworker's child perched on his father's shoulders, laughing against the whir of drills and engines. And Theo realized, not every child grew up being punished. No criminal record, no psychiatric history, no signs of violent behavior, Noah said, flipping through the file. Just one note from his school years, reported suspected abuse at home. Case wasn't pursued, insufficient evidence and uncooperative witnesses. Rachel's breath hitched. His mother and aunt? Noah nodded. Rachel looked down. Same kind of women as my mother, she murmured. In the quiet, Theo wondered, what if, back then, someone had stopped and sat down beside him and asked, "Are you okay?" What if someone had touched his shoulder without asking him to be stronger? Would he still be the man sitting here, alone with blueprints and walls of wood? And now he had done the one thing no one ever did for him. He'd stopped, looked at a child left behind, and chosen not to walk away. "We have the address," Noah said, "but I want you to be prepared. We're heading there now. If Becca is still with him, there's a good chance she's unharmed." Rachel tightened her grip on her coat strap. "I don't care who he is. I just want my daughter safe." "You'll see her again," Noah said, certain. "She's with someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be left." Rachel sat rigid in the back of the patrol SUV, her hands ice cold despite the heater being off. The car slowed as it turned onto a dirt road, narrow enough for only one vehicle. Faint tire tracks cut through damp earth from the night's earlier rain. Through the soft morning fog, a small wooden house came into view. The door was unlocked. Light spilled dimly through the square window. No sounds inside. Rachel stepped out before the officers could stop her. Her heartbeat thudded like a low drum deep in her chest. Noah raised a hand to his officers, motioning them to hold back, then nodded toward Rachel. "You knock. If she's there, just call her. We're right behind you." Rachel walked forward, knocked twice, 1 second, 2. The door opened. Becca, still drowsy, her hair tousled, but those eyes wide, familiar, and full of recognition. "Mama." Rachel couldn't speak. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her so tight it was as if letting go might make her disappear again. "I'm here. I'm here now," Becca whispered, clear and steady. "I'm okay, Mama. He didn't hurt me. I'm safe." Theo Monroe stood a few steps away, still. He wore an old shirt, arms by his sides, his gaze avoiding Rachel's. The officers approached, keeping a professional distance. Noah spoke calmly. "Mr. Monroe, we'd like to ask you some questions. You're not under arrest, but we need your cooperation." Theo gave a small nod, no protest, no denial. Rachel stood up, still holding Becca's hand. She turned to Theo. "You took my daughter. You didn't call the police. You didn't call me. Why?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it trembled, not with anger, but with a helplessness she didn't know how to name, whether to thank him or hate him. Theo looked at her for the first time, steadily. But his eyes didn't ask for forgiveness. They didn't explain. They simply were. "Because she was left behind," he said, "just like I once was." Rachel froze. Becca squeezed her hand. "I told him you didn't know, Mama. I told him you'd come." Rachel looked down at her daughter's small face, those wide eyes holding something far too old for a 9-year-old child. And in that moment, Rachel realized what Becca had learned that day hadn't come from her mother. Not fear, but a faith that the people who love you don't turn their backs, even when the world does. "You knew people would misunderstand," Rachel said after a long silence. "I did," Theo replied, "but you still took her." "Because I'd once sat alone on a bench and no one came." Noah stepped in gently. "We'll need you to come with us, Mr. Monroe. We won't cuff you if you cooperate." Theo nodded, then turned to Becca. "You going to be all right?" Becca nodded, eyes misty. "I'll tell them the truth, I promise." Rachel looked at Theo. "I don't know if I can forgive you, but I understand." For the first time, Theo nodded, like a thank you, not for being trusted, but for being seen. As the police vehicle pulled away down the narrow road, Becca leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "Mama," she whispered, "can I write him a letter?" Rachel didn't answer right away. She looked toward the pine trees, now slowly brightening with morning light. "Yes," she said, "but let him write first." 3 weeks after the disappearance, Rachel's small house began to feel warm again. Not because spring was near, but because Becca had come home. New drawings were taped to the refrigerator, a bridge spanning a river, a small wooden cabin with a square window, and two figures, one tall, one small, standing side by side. Rachel didn't ask much about that night, and Becca didn't offer more. They kept the silence between them like a private pact between two survivors. Becca returned to school, but now, each morning before she left, she would turn back and hug her mother tightly, as if goodbyes needed an extra beat to be complete. Rachel started seeing a therapist after Becca was offered short-term emotional support. On her third session, the question came, "Have you ever forgiven your mother?" Rachel didn't answer. But that night, she opened an old memory box, where a few childhood photos remained, along with pages of her own handwriting from a battered notebook. "I know it was my fault. I'll try not to cry again." And for the first time, Rachel cried without needing anyone's permission. At the same time, Emma Sterling sat alone in a living room that used to be full of voices. The local newspaper lay open on the coffee table. Woman criticized for leaving 9-year-old granddaughter at amusement park. It was a lesson. After the incident, the town's women's council removed Emma from the community board. The badminton group fell silent in their group chat. Even Mrs. Lorna, her neighbor of 20 years, only nodded without speaking now. But what made Emma pause wasn't the gaze of others. It was the first time she reopened an old photo album, saw Rachel, small, smiling, always reaching out for a hug, and realized she had never reached back. No one said it aloud, but there are kinds of guilt that don't need a verdict to be real. Julia, after giving a statement to the police, quietly resigned from her job. She moved to another city, no word to Emma, no explanation to anyone. The night before she left a note on her mother's table. Just one line. "I don't know how much of what we called teaching was just punishment for the child we used to be." One quiet Sunday afternoon, as Rachel folded laundry, Becca walked in with a piece of paper folded in quarters. "Mama, a letter from Mr. Theo." Rachel wiped her hands and opened it. The handwriting was slanted, even, nothing poetic, nothing pleading. "Becca is the first child who made me believe not everyone leaves. I'm working part-time at a small library now. I'm not trying to rewrite the past, but if someday, when Becca is older, she wants to write again, I hope I'll still be someone she can send it to." Rachel folded the letter, placed her hand on Becca's head. "There are still good people," she whispered, "in all the empty places we thought were gone."